has blood cancer. Rick Gardner is here tonight somewhere, and he has still working with his kidney stone. His next procedure is going to be May 22nd. Marie Valverde is having shoulder surgery. Sharon Atkinson is getting treatments to be able to walk without assistance. Dave White has surgery on his leg, and we have a couple of knee replacements. Janet Taylor is going to be getting her knee replaced on May 19th, and Teresa DeBard, Gary Kitchen's sister, is having her knee replaced tomorrow. So are there any other prayer requests that we have? Okay, let's go ahead and have a quick prayer on behalf of these, and we'll get started. Father, we'd like to thank you for giving us life and giving us everything that we have from you. You want us to lift our cares to you, and you know that our bodies here are frail and they give out, and we have pains and we have weaknesses that keep us from activities of living. We'd ask that you'd heal the people that we are lifting up to you tonight. We praise you for the successful surgery that Mark Richardson has gone through, and we ask that you be with the caregivers who will be intervening with Brenda Gardner as she gets her ongoing care, and then the various people we're lifting up to you who are having surgery. Maria Valverde, Dave White, Janet Taylor, and Teresa DeBard. And we just ask that you'd help the therapies that they receive to be effective so that they can live without having pain impeding their daily lives and making them suffer. We know that suffering is our lot here on earth, and we thank you that we have something eternal to look forward to. And we thank you that through Jesus' sacrifice we can come to you and converse with you and lift our cares to you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Okay, so this evening we're going to be doing a mix of biblical principles and practical suggestions, but I want to say at the outset, I don't know anybody's financial situation, so what I'm going to be giving you are some general principles to stimulate your thinking without necessarily making specific recommendations. Although I'm happy to meet with anybody to discuss your particular circumstances if you would like me to. That being said, I'm not a certified financial planner, a certified public accountant. I don't do retirement planning. I'm just an economist who studied STDs for 25 years. So successful money management. When you think of successful money management in a Christian sense, what comes to mind? When you think success, what do you think of? Do you think of anything? You can't hear me? Well, I can speak louder. So a lot of people, when you ask them about successful money management, they conjure up something like this. This is the Biltmore. And so if you can live in a place like the Biltmore, then you've been successful with money management. That's sort of the way the world views it. Success with money means wealth. And that's true in some limited extents with Christians, but not really. Let's look at it another way. And this might be a way that you're not used to thinking about money at all. I want to turn to 1 Corinthians 7. That's Paul's great treatise on marriage. And, as a single person, I'll say he suggests that staying single is preferable, but the reason why is what's relevant for our consideration tonight. He says, I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord, but a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, and his interests are divided. Now, we all know this intuitively. If you have a family, you need to devote some time and energy to them. Paul is saying, essentially, that's a distraction. It's a good distraction, and earlier in the chapter in 1 Corinthians 7, he says, basically, not many people can be single. Basically, God designed us to seek someone to bond with for life, and that's okay. Jesus says the same thing in Matthew 19. God says it in Genesis 2. But Paul says, as a practical sense, when you have to focus on managing your family, you're distracted from serving the Lord, which is what Paul was about 100% of the time. And money can be this way too. It can be a distraction. So, yeah, marriage is good. It causes our attention to be divided. Money can be the same thing in a Christian's life. So I would submit that a Christian view of successful money management is if money is not distracting you. Now, money can definitely be a distraction. I mean, if you can't make next month's mortgage payment, you're going to be distracted. You might be sitting in church on Sunday morning, but part of you is going to be processing, how do I come up with that extra $500? So we want to avoid distractions. So how do we get there? I can't read the slides back there, so I have a handout myself. And handouts are at the back if you want one and you don't have one. So God tells us that he'll meet our needs, material and social, if we put God first. Matthew 6 says this. In Malachi it says this. Luke 18. In Matthew 6, Jesus says, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Therefore, he concludes this passage, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Jesus is saying, God knows what you need to live. Do not be like the pagans. What will we eat? What will we wear? God knows that you need these things, and he's got you covered. Just focus on serving God and don't worry. Malachi 3, we looked at this last winter when we did the finance series. God is telling the Israelites, bring the tithe into the storehouse and just see how I bless you. If you trust me, if you demonstrate that you trust me, then I will pour out blessings on you. Giving is an act of thanksgiving and worship, because when you give, you're parting with something that you could use, and you're trusting that God is going to fill in the gap. You're not going to end up wanting. We talked last winter about sacrificing your firstborn from your flocks. If you do that, what if there's no second and third and fourthborn? Now you've just given away the only animal that you were going to get that year. That can definitely happen. So giving is an act of worship. And Paul returns to this theme in 2 Corinthians 9. He says, tithing is out in the New Testament. It's not a formal requirement anymore. But he says, each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Let's look at this in a little more detail. So, in all things at all times. That kind of sounds like Matthew 6, where Jesus says, God's going to meet your material needs. Having all that you need. Okay, so same thing, Matthew 6. You will abound in every good work. So essentially what Paul is saying here is, God's going to bless you, your material needs will be met, so they won't distract you. And that sounds very much like 1 Corinthians 7. So it all ties together. God's focus is on meeting our needs so that we can focus on serving him, and Paul's saying, that's what I want for you too. And let's look at another passage that talks about distraction. Parable of the sower. We're all familiar with this. And it's obviously an important parable because it's in all three of the synoptic gospels, Matthew 13, Mark 4, and Luke 8. The church where I was converted out of, they had evangelistic Bible studies in the dormitories that were targeted at people not going to church, i.e. people like me. And they always covered the parable of the sower because it has some evangelistic messages. That might have been the first Bible study I went to, in fact. I can't really remember. But we know the story. So the first soil is the path. The word hits it and bounces off. Bink, it just never sinks in. Nothing happens. The second soil is the shallow soil. The seed takes root, it grows up, but it doesn't have the roots aren't deep enough, so it just wilts and dies. Doesn't last. The third soil, the person accepts the word and they last. They survive, they're in it for the long haul, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. So worries of this life, a lot of the worries of this life are tied to money. So the third soil, if you've got money management issues and you're thinking about it and you have needs that you're not able to meet, that can definitely, it can imperil your spiritual walk and get to the third soil. And then the fourth soil is the one where the seed falls on good soil, the person accepts the word, lasts, and they produce a crop 30, 60, or 100 times what's sown. So how do you get there? Well, so our existing financial situation is all about income and outflow, income and expenses. It can inhibit spiritual growth by causing distractions. We've talked about that. And it can prevent you from achieving financial and giving goals. So how do you overcome this? Barriers and limitations. We all face them. I mentioned I'm an economist. The first thing that you learn in Econ 101 is that people have unlimited wants and limited means. So everybody has financial constraints at some level. So if you gather information about your financial situation, plan ways to address it, and then maybe make some strategic changes, that can improve your financial situation, improve your money management situation. So first, gather information. I think one of the most powerful things that anybody can do is track their expenses. Some of you may be doing this already, but tracking expenses is helpful in understanding spending patterns. And as you collect additional data, you'll learn what seasonal patterns and trends are in your spending, and you can take corrective action when needed. Now, this colorful little graph at the bottom is mine. I've been tracking my expenses in a spreadsheet since mid-2021. So I've got the years 22, 23, 24, 25, and the start of 26. And the horizontal blue line that's dashed, that's the overall average expense per month. And you see that there's quite a lot of variation, but these things, the months kind of tie together. Now that I've got 5 years worth of data up there, I can see that, the late summer, August, September, October, those are pretty low spending months, and then things just go berserk in November. That's the holiday season. Black Friday specials for, people in my life, Black Friday specials for me, gift cards, that kind of thing. The turkey itself is not that expensive. But the point is, at this point, I know that I'm going to be spending a lot in November, or I want to. But then the gold line, the solid gold line, that is 2025. What happened in April of 2025? You don't know, I know. The IRS happened. I retired at the end, October of 2024, and they paid me for my unused vacation time. I think they didn't get the withholding right, so I had a really unpleasant surprise when I did my tax return. So that was as bad as November. And then June of 2025, spending was high too. That I bought some power equipment to help me manage my yard, a brush cutter. I'll be happy to show it to you if you want to see it. But the point is, I know what happened that month. Collecting these data, I immediately knew why there was a problem. Now suppose August this year comes and it's high again. Then I can go back to the individual financial detail. I've got this broken down into like 10 different categories. And I can look at what I'm spending and, what am I missing? Where am I losing discipline? Where am I getting in trouble? And I can deal with it. So you gather information, and you can analyze your spending levels in different categories. As I mentioned, I've got a bunch. I've got basically gasoline is one category, all other car expenses is another one, food, whatever's relevant for you if you were to do this. 80-10-10 is the general spending breakdown that is often recommended for people. These are people in their working years. You're not necessarily going to be saving 10% of your Social Security, although if you can, it's good. But that's 10% for giving, at least 10% for savings, and 80% or less for everything else. The 80% includes your mortgage, your transportation, food, other living expenses. It includes debt service if you have car loans or something, credit card payments, student loans. Student loans will follow you to the grave and potentially beyond. But the various spending categories may or may not add up to 80% of your disposable income. If it's more than 80%, that suggests that you've got some financial stress, and reducing discretionary expenses should be prioritized, or you can generate additional sources of income. There's always people pick up side gigs. It's more common this day and age than it was in the past, possibly. And a lot of people in the Gen Z millennial generations might be accustomed to working multiple part-time jobs. So they may have a little bit of flexibility there. And if your expenses are less than 80%, then you've got greater ability to pay down any existing debts, increase your giving, or both. So you gather information, and then you plan. You can develop a budget, and developing a budget really just means you take the categories that you've identified for spending and you pick targets for them for every month. And I've got the example here: housing, transportation, insurance, food and entertainment, everything else. Set your target levels. Informed by your expense tracking, it has to be realistic. If your household spends $1,000 a month on food and you set a budget target of $500, you're almost guaranteed you're setting yourself up to fail. So you've got to come up with something that's realistic, and then you're tracking your monthly expenses. So you identify your pain points. Where is this really binding, and where am I not able to keep my expenses within my budget? And then you can adjust the targets as needed. That's basically budgeting. There are a lot of apps that do this. You can do it manually in Excel or Google Sheets. I'm going to do a video on how to set it up in Google Sheets, but in the meantime, I'm happy to talk with any of you that want to do this. And then once you've done your information gathering and you've planned, then you can make strategic changes. And it's worth talking about the role of saving and investment. Some people sort of take the approach that saving is worldly. It's not something that we should do. Sort of the person clinging to floating debris, waving at the helicopter, no thanks, I don't need you, God's going to save me. Well, part of what God may be doing for you is giving you the ability to save money so that you can provide for your needs at a future point in time, or somebody else's needs. The Bible talks about this. This is not just my opinion. Proverbs 21:20, it says, the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. That's sort of the ant and the grasshopper analogy. Proverbs 13:11, dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. And then Matthew 25, the parable of the 10 virgins. We all know this story, right? There's the 10 virgins there for the wedding banquet. 5 of them bring extra oil, 5 of them don't. The 5 who don't have any say, hey, give us some of your oil so that we can wait for the bridegroom to come. And the people with the savings, they say, no, we can't give any to you, then we won't have enough for ourselves. So then the 5 go off to town. And I've often wondered about this. This is late at night when this is happening. We didn't have QTs that are open 24/7. So I don't know where they were going to get oil, but that's what they do. They're off meeting their needs because they're distracted. They didn't have savings, if you will. And so while they were off meeting their needs, the bridegroom comes, the banquet starts, the door gets shut, and they're shut out. So we don't want to be in that position. Having savings enables us to provide for ourselves. But then, like any good thing, bad motives can make it a problem. Romans 14:23, anything that does not come from faith is sin. In Luke 12:15, Jesus says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life doesn't consist of an abundance of possessions. And then Matthew 6, earlier in the chapter before he says, don't worry, he says, don't store up treasures for yourself on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then Luke 12 talks about this. We know the parable of the guy, the rich fool who says, I've got so much grain, I'm going to build extra barns and store that. I'm on top of the world. And then actually the person is not because they're about to die. So their savings are for naught. So the goal of our accumulating savings is to provide for ourselves, to provide for other people. It's not to get rich in this current age. Well, now let's talk about the other side of the coin, debt. The short answer is that you always hear in a financial seminar is don't go into debt. That being said, probably relatively few of us wrote a check to buy our houses. So we all are accustomed to carrying some level of debt. But it's important to minimize as much as possible. Debt reduction, primarily this is going to be credit card debt for most of us. That's what is immediately controllable by us. Proverbs 22, it says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. Do not be the one who shakes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched out from under you. The church in Denver, we had somebody who declared bankruptcy, and he said the 2 beds for his kids were about the only thing he had left. His bed was gone, but the kids' bed stayed. Everything else was taken away and liquidated for the bankruptcy. So we all know that it's not helpful to be owing money to other people. If you lose your job and you have no debt service, your house is paid for, which, I mean, not all of us are there. Some of us want to be there, but the lower you have in terms of monthly payments, the better off you are. So interest as an expense reduces your flexibility. And the interest on credit card debt, if it goes high, can be just mind-boggling. Credit card debt, in December 2025, the average credit card balance was about $6,700 per person, $11,500 per household. References are there if you'd like to look at them. But it varies by age group. So the Silents and Gen Z. So the Silents are almost all of them retired. They've been retired for a while. And then Gen Z is sort of, they're just starting to come into their adult years. These are the 20-somethings. They have about $3,400 to $3,500 in credit card debt on average. Boomers and millennials, the millennials are sort of the young to mid adults getting into the early 40s. And then the boomers, of course, are the people who were born through 1960-something. There's some fuzziness. I was born in 64. I'm not going to say I'm a boomer. I'm just not. I'm Gen X. But my generation, those are the people who are at or very close to retirement now. So they're sort of late 40s, 50s, early 60s. They have the highest, $9,600 in credit card debt. Retirement assets, the median 401k balance for Gen X is about $81,000. So another way to look at this is if your typical Gen Xer retires and they want to pay off their credit cards, they're going to use more than 10% of their retirement savings to do it. So that is a suboptimal situation. Now, the averages are always skewed higher by extremely high upper end balances, but another statistic I found, the average retirement account held about 2.6 years worth of income for people at or above the age of 60. You know how much you're supposed to draw out of your 401k every year once you retire? Anybody know? 4%, yes. That is a general rule of thumb. Some people like Dave Ramsey says you can go higher. But basically, if you take 4% of your 401k balance out each year, then the chances of you running out of money are very small. So 4% of $81,000 is like less than $300 a month. That's not the best. So let's move on and talk about understanding time trade-offs, because there's really something here that you have to understand when it comes to putting something on a credit card that I think can be very powerful for you. The way you look at it can make a difference in how motivated you are to incur the expense when you don't have the money on hand to pay for it. So time has value, good and bad. A good thing received in the future is less than a good thing received now. If I went into Oprah mode and I said, everybody here gets $100, you can have it tonight or you can have it a year from now. This is hypothetical, don't try to hold me to this. But most of you would want to take the $100 tonight, even if you believed me that I would still give it to you a year from now. It's something good. $100 makes everybody happy. You want it now. Bad things in the future are not as bad things now. If I say you're going to break your leg tomorrow, or you can break it a year from now, most of you would probably choose a year from now, unless there's some unusual circumstances. So good things and bad things. Basically, future events get discounted, whether for better or worse. The discounting I'm talking about is for time preference, not inflation. Inflation is handled separately. So I'm not trying to bury you in numbers, but come on, this may be fun. We'll see. The current US discount rate for regulatory analysis is 3.1%. And that just means if you have something that is worth $1, it's worth $1.03 to have it now versus a year from now. So the government is supposed to use discounting to assess the cost and benefit of government programs. I'm not going to deal with the $37 trillion in debt. That's not on me, even though I work for the government. But 3.1%, that expresses the time preference that people have for getting something good now versus a year from now. Now, your individual discount rate may be a little bit different, but you see here maybe you don't see here. Now you see here. The current average credit card interest rate is 21.5%, way above the discount rate. So, and that's way above any interest rate. And then the buy now, pay later services like Klarna. Does anybody know what buy now, pay later is? Okay, this is a generational thing. Charlie Kirk talked about it because he was a millennial. He was in touch with people of college age. We're going to see some examples of buy now, pay later, but basically, this is a way to get credit without using a credit card. And the lure is always dangled in front of you. You can get this at Walmart at the checkout. 4 interest-free payments every other week. But the problem is if you miss one of the payments because you forget, and if you do buy now, pay later for a lot, you're going to be juggling lots of balls. If you miss one, then you can start to get fees, and then the interest rate starts to bite, and it can be up to 36%. So buy now, pay later is like, having a cute Wolverine as a pet. It's a good idea until it's not. So now let's look at a specific example of this. Let's suppose there's a $500 TV, and your TV breaks, you want a new TV, it's $500, inflation rate's 5%. If you wait a year to buy it, maybe you get your tax refund check next year, you can buy the TV. If you wait a year, it's going to cost you $525. And then the discount rate, the time preference, is 3%. So what all this means is it's worth $541 to you to have it today versus in the future. If that math does not convince you, come talk to me afterwards. It works out, I promise. But then if you put it on a credit card at 25% interest and you buy it today for $500, that's the amount of the transaction. You go to Costco, they bill your credit card for $500. If you wait a year, you're going to pay $627 for it. If you wait 2 years to pay it off, it's $785. And if you wait 3 years, it's $984. So that thing is just a financial disaster. It's nowhere near $541. Now, I've got the discounted amounts. If you were thinking, aha, Tom, you did not discount those numbers. You're quite right, but I put them off to the side. Either way, it's a financial loser. This is what's happening with the credit card. You're not thinking, I like this TV so much, I'm going to spend $950 for it. It's just, I can have it now, no pain now, and I take it home with me, and it's only $500. But then it ends up costing a lot more. There's a factor known as the pain of payment, and academics have actually systematically researched this. Money is what we use in our society as a unit of exchange. That's the only way I'm able to translate my skills as an economist that studies STDs into buying food or supporting missions. So when you lose your money, you're losing options, things that you can no longer do. That goes away when you pay money. So paying money actually does cause distress. However, paying with cash, when you actually are handing the bills over, that causes more distress than paying with a credit card, paying with loyalty points. Now, loyalty points, you might think, well, I got to use them for something, or they go away. But there's an opportunity cost. And then mobile payments, that's just basically where you're using, it can be buy now, pay later, pay through your phone, Google Pay, whatever. But when you pay something with a credit card, you're not as aware of the fact that you have sacrificed money. You've given it up. The day when gasoline went to $4.27, I had to gas up my truck. Fortunately, Costco still had it at $3.79, but still I put in over $100 into my truck that day. I wasn't immediately aware of it. I actually bought gas at a couple of places, and it wasn't until I got home and added the numbers up, because I track fuel purchases too. When I did that, I suffered a little PTSD. I mean, $100 is a lot of money. I had a job one time where I was making less than $3 an hour, and most of you probably did too. And I still think in those terms. But it wasn't as painful. If I had just been shelling out $20 bills at the cashier window, I would have been acutely aware how much that gas was costing me. That's why Dave Ramsey, if you look at his videos or you listen to his radio show, he will often say he hates credit cards, even if you pay the balance off every month. And it's because the pain of payment is less. Sure, you're paying the bill at the end of the month, but you're separating the time you actually lose the money from the time you make the purchase, and so you're likely to overspend. Since I mentioned Dave Ramsey, let's talk about him. Debt snowball. He says if you want to reduce your debt, he recommends the debt snowball. This is, we're talking about planning and making strategic changes here. To do the debt snowball, if you listen to Dave Ramsey, you probably already know this. You list all of your debts. Let's say you've got 3 credit cards, a student loan, and a car loan. From the smallest to the largest in terms of balance, don't even look at the interest rate. You make the minimum payments on all of your loans except the one that you're trying to reduce. And then you max that. You go as much as you can. You start eating, we had spaghetti tonight. You start eating spaghetti 5 nights a week. You never go out to eat. You just cut your expenses to the bone to try to get rid of that one loan, that one balance that you've decided to target. He says suspend 401k contributions. Now, I think maybe if you're still in an environment where you're working, you would continue to make the employer, whatever you need to do to get the employer match, because that's an immediate doubling of your money. But when you pay off the smallest debt, then you switch to the next largest one, and so on until you actually pay off all your debts. And it usually makes people debt-free in 18 to 24 months if they're committed to this. There's another method called the debt avalanche that is where you don't do the highest balance, you do the highest interest rate. And mathematically that makes sense, but motivationally people are more likely, when they get a quick win, they say this debt payoff thing is really working. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review that said focusing on paying down the account with the smallest balance has the most powerful effect on people's sense of progress and their motivation to continue paying down their debts. I'm going to do a much more detailed example of this where we're going to walk through this mathematically. I have an example for the avalanche, the snowball, and what I call the depressed snowball. And I'll show you this in terms of numbers. But enough for tonight. If you are trying to reduce your debt load, the debt snowball is worth considering, and there are just probably 30 Dave Ramsey videos on YouTube about it. So let's assume that you've gotten to the point where you have paid down your debts, or at least things are manageable if that was causing problems for you. How do you stay debt-free, or at least minimize your debt? Some low-hanging fruit and quick wins. These are things that all of you could, if we sat down and brainstormed, all of you would come up with these. Duplicated streaming services, cable or satellite plans. Now, this has become a problem. 5 years ago, this was not an issue. But now we've got Amazon Prime that has a lot of streaming stuff, Hulu, then there's like Disney Plus, and then if you've got cable or satellite, you might end up, figure out what it is you're using these for, and you might have the same network available on 3 different streaming and satellite services, and so you might be able to strategically start cutting some of those out. Maybe cutting one out means that one channel that you like occasionally you're no longer going to have access to, but I can't give you, it's not always going to be completely painless, but hopefully the pain will be minimized. Subscriptions are another one. The magazines no longer have the expiration date usually. They just send you a renew today for 50% off, and then you find out that you're paid up to 2033. Wall Street Journal, I used to subscribe to this. I started in grad school. It was cheap or free, and for over 20 years I subscribed to it. They don't have discounts for renewals, at least they didn't when I subscribed to it. And it had gotten to where it was $400 a year, but I liked it. I mean, the AHEAD, I was telling some of you about an article I read in it about various things. I finally decided I'm not really getting $400 a year out of it. It comes out 250 days of the year, I think. So on a day-to-day basis, it's not that bad, but it really adds up. Now the renewal fee is $470, so I got rid of it. I had pain of loss maybe for a couple of months, and then I went on with my life, and I'm, $2,400, almost $3,000 ahead. That's not going to make the difference in my retirement. It's not like I retired a year sooner because I stopped the Wall Street Journal, but it certainly doesn't hurt. Cell phone plans, there are the bargain carriers, the Straight Talk, the Mint Mobile, the Cricket, Boost Mobile. Those typically work okay, depending on what you do with your cell phone. It might be just as good. And you might go from spending $120 a month down to spending $45 a month. Again, low-hanging fruit, easy, relatively painless things to do. Car loans, if you get a car loan, less than 60 months is preferable, 48 is better. My credit union now has car loans out to 84 months, which I think is a poor idea. Before you do any car loan, you should figure out how much you're going to be spending in total, and it'll end up being like that TV set I mentioned a while ago. I mean, car loans are one of those things that a lot of people don't have the money to just write a check for a car, so they should minimize the interest that they pay. Reduce your food away from home. This is things like restaurants and coffee shops, most obviously. It's an example that everybody uses. I certainly can't bring new information to it. If you go to Starbucks every day versus having a Keurig on your counter, you're going to be spending a lot more money. And then after-season markdowns can be extreme. So don't buy your winter coat in October, buy it in March. But you do have a caveat with that. You've got to beware, the last line on this slide, beware of fake savings. If you're buying something on sale that you wouldn't buy otherwise, that's not a bargain. And, a coupon, I'll give you 5 for 1 at Joseph A. Bank this month. If you weren't going to buy a bunch of ties, then you're not really saving money. And anyway, small changes produce large savings over time. The Wall Street Journal, $400 is a lot. Nobody here would turn me down if I offered to give you $400 tonight, but that's not epic. I think $2,400 is definitely getting epic. I think one of the things that can be the most powerful for you in terms of successful money management is to cultivate an attitude of contentment. Paul talks about this a lot. In 1 Timothy 6:6, he says, godliness with contentment is great gain. And in Philippians 4, he devotes a fair amount of attention to it. He says, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Paul certainly had times when he was hungry, he was homeless. He was facing great material deprivation, probably far greater than anything he experienced as a Pharisee, but to him it didn't matter. Temporary situations, when you go to a dormitory when you start college, it's a horrible situation compared to what you've been growing up in, right? You've got your own room, most people typically. Now you're sharing a room with a total stranger. The hall's going to be noisy at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. Maybe you'll like that, maybe I don't. You might have to walk down the hall to the bathroom, at least you did when I was in college. So it's a real step down, but most people are content in college because there are some benefits socially and they like being away from their parents. But then also they know it's a temporary situation. We can endure anything if it's temporary. In Hebrews 13, there's a further admonition, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. God says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And then in Hebrews 13:14, it emphasizes the temporary nature of our life here on earth. Now, contentment, you're going to laugh at this, but it's really true, is an issue in the federal government. They constantly train. I went to numerous trainings over the 25 years. When you're doing a procurement, spend the money to get what you need and not any more. So if you need to buy a bunch of trucks for your people who go out to farms and do inspections, if you're the USDA, don't get four-wheel drive unless you're going to be burnt driving off-road. When we were buying computers, they would tell us, don't geek out and get something that's really cool that a gamer would want that has 25 terabytes of RAM in it or something, if all you need is something to do Excel and Word. Now, you may think that the government is not successful in this, but at my level, we were. We had to pinch pennies. We really did. So let's talk about contentment and cast iron. Again, these are just examples. I don't know if anybody is facing a purchasing decision tonight for cast iron skillet, but if you want one, Yeti makes really state-of-the-art. They bought a company, a little artisan foundry called Butterpat, and this thing is smooth, it's well designed, everybody loves it. Look down at the bottom, 4 interest-free payments with a firm. That's one of those buy now, pay later places I was talking about. But anyway, it's $250 if you want it. And nobody would say that it's a bad skillet. But then you've got the Lodge. You can get one of these at Walmart. It's $30. You can buy it off of Lodge's website. You can do buy now, pay later for the Lodge skillet too. But it's $30, and if you go to something like the Reddit cast iron forum, people will say, yeah, the Lodge is kind of all you need. But the Yeti is a lot cooler. Now, some of them will say the Yeti is not so good because it's just, they just don't like Yeti. If you want to go antique, on eBay I saw the Sydney 12-inch for $349, and if you really want to go for the gold, there was a Wapak skillet with the Indian head logo. If you collect cast iron, you know what this is. If not, you're wondering what in the world is happening on a Wednesday night at church. But the point being, if you're in the market for a purchase, oftentimes there's something that's relatively cheap that will get the job done. Other times there's something that's really cool that you'd like to have. And Paul is saying, just be content. God is going to meet your needs, and the important thing is serving God, focusing on Him, focusing how you can live for Him today, and focus on what life is going to be like when we're all in heaven. And then here's an example maybe that some of you can relate to, cell phones. I got this last week off of the Samsung site. The Galaxy S26 Ultra is a very nice phone for $1,099. This is unlocked. I mean, you can probably get one cheaper through a carrier. But then the Galaxy A17, I figured it'd be pushing it a little bit to just put the specs up here and go through it line by line, but they're very similar phones. The camera is going to be a lot better with the Galaxy S26, but if all you do is text message and make calls and do some web surfing, maybe the $199 phone will get you where you need to be. Again, these are just examples. If you're trying to improve your money management, if you don't want financial woes to be dogging you and distracting you from God, these are the kinds of purchases that you can make that will turn the page and make things better for you. Another thing that is very powerful that will make a very big difference in your life, if this is an area of weakness for you, where you've got money management issues, is to realize that time has value. Your time does, and so does other people's. Anything you purchase has labor value embedded in the price. If you have taken economics, I'm not a Marxist. This is not the labor theory of value, so put that out of your head. But if you buy a loaf of bread, some of the price you're paying is for the workers at the bakery to, throw the ingredients into the vat, get it into the oven, put it in the bags, put it in the boxes, and then the people on Saturday mornings that you always see in the grocery stores with the big rack of them shoving them onto the shelf for you to buy. All of those people have to be paid, and you pay for them. So if you can provide some of the labor for a product that you want or have, the price is usually going to be lower. This is true, usually, even if the commercial processes are more efficient. Whoever makes nature's own bread, they're far more efficient than you could ever be. But you can still save money if you bake bread yourself. So some examples of how you operationalize this: if you buy ingredients, not ready-to-eat foods, and you substitute labor for equipment. We'll talk about examples of each of these. On the buy ingredients, another article I read in the Wall Street Journal, some of you were asking about the Wall Street Journal, back when Hamburger Helper came out in 1971, housewives thought of it as something they would make for dinner if they didn't have time to cook. Now, people think of it as something they make for dinner when they do have time to cook. The perceptions have shifted. And Hamburger Helper is a home-cooked meal if you compare it to a Marie Callender's microwave meal. So buy ingredients and not ready-to-eat food and use some labor. Some of you also, I know when I'm saying spend a little bit of time, you're saying, I don't have enough time as it is. And that's true, but most of us have time that we can squeeze out. And if you're trying to save money, that's one of the most powerful ways to do it. So your money can free up time. You know, you can hire a lawn service to cut your grass so you don't have to do it. But your time can also free up money. You can get rid of the landscapers and do it yourself, just as an example. So let's talk about bread since I did. This is bread from Kroger. It's, you know, Nature's Own. I think I've had it at some point. It's pretty decent bread, $4.29 for a 20-ounce loaf. And then that thing off on the side is not a rock. That's a loaf of bread I baked. And then I've got my ingredient costs. And my savings per loaf is about $5.14 by weight. But I've been doing this for 17 years. And so in that time, I figured I've saved about $4,500. And again, it's not like I retired a year early because I baked my own bread. But over time, over a fairly long time, that has added up to substantial savings. And the thing is, I wasn't even trying to save money. I just did it because I wanted home-baked bread. And the bread I bake is better than anything you can buy in the store. So if you do it yourself, you might get a superior product, but you can also save money. And these are tiny amounts of money. This is not going to make a difference in anyone's finances. Saving $5 a week, that's not going to be the difference between bankruptcy and financial solvency. But over time, it does add up. And at CDC, one of our former CDC directors had an initiative called the Ton of Feathers. And the idea is each feather is really light, but when you get a whole bunch of them, they still weigh a ton, and they can make a big impact. So I've mentioned cooking at home versus getting food away. The figure on the right here, the yellow line is the share of the home food budget that is food away from home. And food away from home, I've got over on the side. It includes things like restaurants, takeout, Costco and Sam's Club rotisserie chicken, that kind of thing, and Starbucks. And then the blue line is food expenditures at home. So those two lines always add up to 100%, all the way across the graph. You see it starts at 1964, the year I was born. Back then, 70% of the food dollar roughly was spent on food consumed at home. And then you see in the early 2000s, they sort of became 50-50 and they wiggled back and forth. And then food away from home took the lead. That sharp dip is COVID, when nobody went out to restaurants because most of them were closed and people were afraid to go out anyway. So there was that brief time when it came almost back to parity, and then food away from home went up. But look at the top lines on the left side of the page. Food away from home, so January 2020 to December 2025, food away from home is up almost 30%, or food at home is up almost 30%. Food away from home is up 35%. Now, you might say that's 5% difference, no big deal, but in terms of relative percentage, food away from home has gone up 17% more than food at home. So meals made at home are cheaper, usually, and they're going up in cost less than food away from home. So this is another thing where you can probably make some material changes and recoup some money right away by focusing more on food at home. If you eat every meal at home, then this may have no value for you, but if you eat a lot out, then it might. So when you put it all together, you take your large skillet and you bake your pizza at home, and you don't get one from Domino's, and you don't do it in a Yeti. And in case you're wondering, this is a pizza that I baked. It's sourdough discard crust. I'm happy to tell anybody about it if you want to know. So now let's talk about substituting labor for equipment. And we're drawing down here. We're almost out of time, and we're almost to the end of the slides. So if you've got a mower purchase decision, you fired the landscaper. Don's not here tonight, so I can talk about this. You decide you're going to cut your grass on your own. You need to buy a mower. Push mower is going to take more time. Riding mower is going to be faster. Substantial cost difference. These are just examples I pulled off of the Lowe's website. I mean, they're all different price points, but for the riding lawnmower, you're going to go a lot faster, and that's why you see the professional landscapers always using the riders, because for them, their main expense is labor, and they want to minimize their labor costs for every lawn they cut. So they're going to go big on the capital, the equipment, but we have different concerns if we're trying to save money. For something like the church, I mean, a push mower maybe wouldn't be practical because you'd be walking back and forth all day long. You get lots of steps in, but it maybe wouldn't work. But for most of us, the size grass that we cut, a riding lawnmower or a walking push mower is going to work. I think, as I was mentioning, commercial processes use more equipment to reduce their labor cost. Overseas, it's the opposite. I was in South Africa once, and the landscapers there were using weed eaters. They had 5 of them walking back and forth across the grass at the Holiday Inn because they paid their labor very little, so they didn't want to spend a lot of money on equipment for them. But as home users, we can trade our leisure time. And economics, any time that you're not spent working for money is called leisure. So you may say, I have no leisure time, but in terms of economists, when you're sleeping, that's leisure time. So you can trade your leisure time for monetary savings. And keep in mind cost versus price. This is the point, if I was lecturing freshman economics students, I'd talk about the opportunity cost, but if you're trying to save money, giving up some of your time to do it will help. And I think if we use the employer model for our personal expenditures, this is another aspect of contentment, it will take us far. Businesses, they want their employees to be productive and they don't want them to be distracted. So you want to give your people enough tools to do the job and not have to be scrounging around and, mechanics in a auto repair bay, they're not going to be trading screwdrivers. Everybody's going to have their own. They don't want to be distracted like that. But you don't want to give them luxuries. If you see a pickup truck out on the highway that's got a company logo on it, it's going to be one of the base models. If it's a Ford F-150, it's not going to be a King Ranch or a Platinum model. They're not going to be sitting there in leather seats with, enhanced sound insulation. They're going to have what they need to do the job and nothing more. And we can think of ourselves as employees in God's company or soldiers in God's army. And something else, and this, I think is just about where we're going to end. Another way that you can end up overpaying is when you you have to pay something eventually. There's a great time separation. We're talking more than 1 month for a credit card bill. If you don't have to incur a cost today, you don't feel it today, and you may not even think about it. So as an example, let's suppose you've got a car that gets 33.3 miles per gallon. Gasoline costs $3.50 per gallon. This worked a couple weeks ago, not so good now. What is the car owner's total cost to drive 100 miles? So you basically, 3 gallons of gas is $3.50. It's not $10.50. Most of you probably intuitively know that. You need to ask questions. How much does the car insurance cost? How much does the maintenance cost? What's the depreciation cost? And the total cost ends up being about 27 cents per mile. So to drive 100 miles is $27. Now this is what I'm doing tonight. Drove my car. It gets actually a little bit better gas mileage, but when you include the depreciation, that's one of the big ones that nobody really thinks about. and the insurance and everything else, it's about 27 cents a mile. And the truck, which I did not drive tonight, Ray's Wemke, is 67 cents per mile, so it would be almost $70 to make the round trip, and I'm not going to do that if I'm hauling air in the bed. So, well, yeah, that is true. I'm willing to self-insure against that possibility. And I'll note that the IRS allows 72 cents per mile deduction for business expenses. And they don't do that because they're trying to give you a free benefit. They're doing that because that's actually the real cost of operating a vehicle, but we don't think that way. When I was, a kid back in the 1970s oil embargo days when it was hard to buy gas and gas got really expensive, what did families do? They started strategizing to combine trips. Okay, we've got to go to the grocery store, so we'll go to Target as well because it's right next door. And then Sunday on the way home from church, we'll do something else. We'll minimize the miles that we drive. If you adopt that, you'll end up driving less and you will reduce your automobile expenses as well. And again, that's just an example. It may or may not resonate with you. So in summary, money issues can distract us from our mission, obviously. We know that God's going to meet our needs if we seek first the kingdom. To overcome financial barriers, a three-step process, gather information, plan, and then make strategic changes, can at least get the ball rolling to improve our money management situation and reduce the distraction that we may be feeling as we're trying to serve the kingdom. Saving is good, greed is bad. You should minimize debt, and adopting a spiritual focus can lead to contentment and frugality, and it can keep money management issues from turning us into a third soil. We don't want to be full of brambles and briars. We want to be the good soil that produces an abundant crop. Removing money, stresses, and distractions is a good way to help get us there. So that's about all I have for tonight. Does anybody have any questions? And again, if you have any particular questions about situations that you're facing that this maybe isn't responsive to, feel free to talk to me. You can send email. I've got my emails in the church directory, and then also finance@hmccfamily.com is an email address for the finance ministry.
I think you did a great job.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can move fast, but all right, thank you.